Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly, monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the SafeCamp Audio Network. You can check out our show page and all of SafeCamp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCampAudio on social media. On today's episode, we talked to Naomi Goldstein, who for nearly 20 years led research and evaluation work at the Administration for Children and Families, which is the part of the federal government focused on family support, the safety net, and the child welfare system. The division that she oversaw, which is called the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, is being effectively decentralized and downsized pursuant to an announcement made by Trump administration officials in February. Goldstein is among hundreds of research experts who have signed a letter to the administration opposing that decision. And she was nice enough to join us to first really explain how this part of the federal government develops and executes on research and evaluation projects, and break down why she thinks the Trump administration's decision to change the way things work in this area is a mistake. We also had a chance to discuss her very interesting later in life career change. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Naomi Goldstein. The Administration for Children and Families was established in 1991 to serve as a centralized space in the federal government for spending and programs related to family assistance, early childhood, child welfare, and more. 4 years later, on August 9th, 1995, the Federal Register announced the establishment of what would become the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, which was created to be a principal advisor to this new agency's leadership around, of course, research and evaluation. And we are joined today by Naomi Goldstein, who helped lead research and evaluation work at the Administration for Children and Families from 2004 to 2022, which means she did that under, if I'm not missing anybody, 2 Republican and 2 Democratic presidents. OPRE, which is the agency I just referred to, was significantly downsized last month when the Trump administration announced it would be moving a lot of its work into different parts of the Administration for Children and Families. So Naomi agreed to jump on with me first to just kind of help listeners and me, frankly, understand how federal research on children and families works, and to share her views on why this decentralization of sorts is not a good idea. So Naomi, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, John.
Let's get these guys to know you a little bit before we get into the seriousness of the day. Kind of a house rule here on our podcast. You got to give the folks a favorite of yours in the following categories. You don't have to give me all of these. Just have to give me one or as many as you want. But your favorite musical group, sports team, movie or TV show, or book. What do you got for the people, Naomi?
Those are hard categories.
Most people end up giving me a recent one they like. I'd say more than favorite. League leader all time is Prince. I think 4 people have said Prince is their favorite.
Oh,
musician.
really?
Yeah.
Gosh. I'm going to have to go with Ella Fitzgerald. And I'm not quite old enough to be of her era, but she is an amazing singer.
Hard to beat that. And then before we get to your experience in the federal government, I think it's really cool that after you left it in 2022, you went back to nursing school and became a nurse, right?
I did. And I'm now a bedside nurse at a hospital.
What's that been like? I mean, you went to public policy school not that long ago. I'm not going to date you here. And then had
a long time ago.
And then had this whole long career in government, and then you went and did well, still in health, but totally different, right? Must be
very,
something.
very different.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do something that was very different. I had never really been interested in direct service, and somehow I became interested in the idea. The education, well, first of all, I went back into, undergraduate school at the age of 64. It was really fun to be with classmates of a range of ages and backgrounds and learn a whole new subject. It turns out biology is really interesting. And most of what I learned, I think, has been discovered since I last took biology in 10th grade in 1972. The nursing curriculum is very heavy on memorization, and none of my previous education really was. And also, I don't memorize as well as I used to. So it was not easy, but it was fascinating. And I do love being a nurse. There are just endless opportunities to be kind every day. Generally, people are very appreciative, and I'm learning new skills all the time.
That's really awesome. My one prolonged stay in the hospital in my life, I really came to, I think it's like the thing that sticks with me is just how amazing the nurses are. The doctors are
Always
great
love
too,
to
but
hear
the
that.
nurses are pretty amazing. Yeah. I want to start very generally with how research and evaluation works at the Administration for Children and Families.
So, first, I want to mention that the federal government has been a leader and a key player in evaluation of government programs and for decades. And that role and the infrastructure to support it and the staffing have really been strengthened steadily over the last 2, 3 decades, with a big boost by the passage of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act in, I think, 2018, signed by then President Donald Trump. So the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at ACF, as you said, sponsors research and evaluation to inform ACF leadership and ACF programs about the effectiveness of the services that ACF sponsors. And those include a range of human services, particularly focused on family, but it includes the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, often known as welfare. It includes childcare subsidies, child abuse prevention and response, the Head Start program, and many other services.
Take us through sort of how ideas of what to look into are born, which I imagine there are different ways, and
Yes.
what steps occur from that point until you have that final product of either a study or an eval or something. How does that all
Sure.
go?
So, first off, all of the research and evaluation activities that are sponsored by ACF or any federal agency have to be authorized and funded through statute. And sometimes those statutes are very broad. More often, they're tied to a specific program. So, here's a pot of money. Please do research on the effectiveness of childcare subsidies or Head Start or welfare to work programs. So, already the scope typically is defined. And then agency leadership, program leadership and staff, and I mean at the federal level. So, for example, the Head Start director or Head Start staff, and a variety of other stakeholders might be and should be consulted to try and figure out priorities. There's never enough money, so you do have to set priorities about research questions. Typically, at the beginning of a new administration in my office, we would look at the platform of the president-elect, and then as appointees begin to arrive, we would look at their interests and try to think of questions that would be especially relevant to the policy priorities of the administration. And then, since the passage of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Act, every cabinet agency is required to put together a multi-year learning agenda. ACF, as a sub-cabinet agency, chose to do it, although we weren't required to, as well as an annual evaluation plan. So, we would work on that with our program partners, with agency leadership, that we weren't required, but a cabinet agency would be required to do public outreach and get public input. So then there would be kind of a slate of proposed studies that would be agreed upon with program partners and typically put forward and approved by agency leadership.
And is that
At
done
that,
like on a yearly basis? Like how often do you
yes,
guys do that? You do it
yes,
annually.
it's got to be yearly because the money is
Congress.
yearly,
Right.
and the money,
Yeah.
it's not always the same amount of money every year. So you can't really assume, I mean, you can make a long-term plan, but you have to be prepared to adjust it.
Yeah.
In any given year, a large portion of the money typically goes to ongoing projects because many projects last several years, but a substantial portion would also be available for new projects. And in deciding those priorities, we would also want to take into account what's already known, what questions were raised by recent research. Research and evaluation often raise at least as many questions as they answer. Once agency leadership approves a slate of new projects, then the federal staff translate those projects or those questions, really, those broad questions, into specific project designs and would put out requests for proposal for contracts or grant announcements for grants. And if you want, I can tell you why you'd use one or the other, but I'll skip over that
I
for
actually
now.
would love to know. I'm
Okay,
sorry. I
great.
actually was really
No,
interested in
that's
that.
fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
grants and contracts are legally different instruments. A contract is for the purchase of something. So it's purchasing something for use by the government. And in the evaluation world, there's a long and strong tradition of making all those results public. But legally, it's purchasing something for the use of the government.
Okay.
Whereas a grant is providing funds for an activity for the public good. In both cases, there's oversight, but the oversight of grants is typically looser. And in the evaluation world, we would use grants when our questions are more open ended, or maybe we want to spur a variety of approaches because we don't know the exact approach. Whereas when we're letting a contract, typically we have a pretty good idea of what we want and we're more prescriptive.
Okay. So when you're just like evaluating a program or something, contract, it sounds from what you're saying like
Typically,
contracts are typical. And when it's
yep.
open-ended and like we don't know where this is going to go necessarily,
Mhm.
better for a grant.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
good general description.
You guys work together in government to come up with what you want to know and how you want to find it out. But it's really other entities that take it from
Yes.
there, right?
Yes. And there are several reasons why the work is primarily carried out by private sector partners, usually some are nonprofit, some are for profit. One is some funds that are provided by statute cannot be used for federal staff. So they have to be used for grants or contracts. In addition, evaluation work the requirements fluctuate a lot depending on the stage of the project. At one stage, you might need a whole bunch of staff to be carrying out telephone or in-person surveys. At another stage, you might need data analysts sitting at their desks and crunching the data. And the private sector can be more flexible in that way. In addition, when you go out to get private sector expertise, it's a competitive process. And that is beneficial to the government and the quality of the work. So whether it's a contract or a grant, the entities make proposals. They are reviewed, typically with attention to both cost and quality. And then based on weighing both of those aspects, the government makes an award. And the evaluation staff have subject matter expertise, but it's the contracts office and the grants office who have the expertise and a fair amount of authority about those processes, and we work closely with them.
And so once these grants or contracts are made, your guys' job then is to really make sure the money is being spent on those projects appropriately. And how much do you get into actually, shepherding along the work? Are you guys pretty austere from that at that point?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, so the expertise and knowledge that federal evaluation staff have is, it's very important in all the stages I've described so far. Helping to set priorities, advising leadership on questions and priorities, translating those into instruments to be able to, make a grant or contract that will be, have a good chance of success. And then providing a fair amount of oversight. There was an article that I read a number of years ago that compared contract oversight, the role of overseeing a contract, essentially to being similar to a high level manager in the sense that you're not doing the work, but you are trying to lead and guide the work. It can vary. It varies depending on the workload of the federal staff. The more projects you oversee, the less intensive your oversight can be. But we do aim to ensure quality and to ensure that the goals that the government had in making the award are being met. Also, evaluation and research are notoriously unpredictable. You may set out a project believing that you can achieve, say, an 80% response to your survey. And it turns out you're only getting a 60% response to your survey. Do we want to shift resources from some other part of the contract in order to get that survey response rate up or not? And if we do want to change priorities and activities within the contract, how exactly are we going to do that while still maintaining a focus on the most important aspects of the project?
So for nearly 20 years, you're overseeing this from the top. But what is the person in your job's relationship with the higher powers at HHS? Like, are you mostly dealing with the ACF secretary.
So the ACF is headed by an assistant secretary.
Assistant secretary, right? Yeah.
And so the director of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, who also holds the title Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning, Research, and Evaluation, reports directly to the assistant secretary. So, different assistant secretaries not only have different policy priorities, but also have very different management styles. So sometimes in that position, I would have regular meetings with the assistant secretary. Sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes we'd have them for a while and then things would get busy for the assistant secretary in some other area and we wouldn't for a while. But essentially that person reports to the assistant secretary, and the formal, role as expressed in the Federal Register where OPRE is, existence is established, is that OPRE's role is to advise the assistant secretary.
Those must be occasionally some interesting meetings. I mean, you're coming in to give them sometimes interesting news, sometimes bad news about progress. Sometimes I would imagine you're walking in knowing you're going to give a assistant secretary findings they aren't going to be happy with.
So in my time at ACF, almost without exception, the assistant secretaries were extremely supportive of the research and evaluation enterprise and genuinely wanted to know the information that we were providing. And we did work very hard not to present any surprises. The ACF evaluation policy gives the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning, Research, and Evaluation the authority to approve the final design of research projects.
We got to change that name. You should be like the viceroy of research or something.
It gives the person in that position authority to approve release of reports, but we never wanted that to be a surprise. So we put in place a procedure that, when it came close to the completion of a report, we would send forward what we affectionately called the info memo, which would summarize the questions and the findings, and always had, if we thought it was something that was going to be controversial or big news, we would schedule a briefing. If it was more routine, we would just offer that. If you have questions or would like a briefing, please let us know. If you want to schedule a press release or briefings for the Hill or other stakeholders, please let us know. Sometimes assistant secretaries would say, well, yeah, that's really interesting. I would like to get a briefing on that. And sometimes they wouldn't, but we always wanted to make that opportunity available. And similarly with our program office partners. So the head of the TANF office, the head of the childcare office, we would try to keep them closely informed. And at the staff level, we would be in constant communication.
Right. So to summarize everything we just talked about, the ideas, the thoughts on what to look into are partially borne by Congress and funding, partially by ACF, and even above that, it's put into language of how you want it done. Those contracts and grants are made. You're managing those projects from an arm's length while other people do it. And then when it's time to land the plane on those types of things, it was OPRE's job as your job for a long time to make sure that people in ACF knew what was coming and that there was thoughtful planning on rolling out the findings.
Yes, I would add two elements. One,
yes, please.
I did mention, but you didn't emphasize that the selection process for the people, the entities to carry out the work is competitive.
Right.
And then what I didn't mention is getting the results is an intermediate step. Every step is an intermediate step. But once you have the results, then it's not so easy to interpret them and figure out the implications for policy and practice. And we would always work closely with our program and policy partners, because who better to figure that out with. And one way to think about the role of federal evaluation staff is as knowledge brokers, interpreting the questions and interests of policy and program staff and translating them into research and evaluation questions and projects, and then helping to translate the findings into actionable information for policy and program officials.
Are you a professional in the field of child welfare, juvenile justice, or other family and youth services? Subscribe today to Youth Services Insider, the imprint's exclusive section on all the insider news you need to stay in the know. Funding opportunities, major federal and state policy shifts, interviews with key leaders in the field. It's all available only for our Youth Services Insider subscribers. Sign up for a monthly or yearly subscription today by visiting imprintnews.org/subscribe. Our podcast listeners get 10% off their subscription by entering the promo code podcast10. That's imprintnews.org/subscribe and get 10% off your subscription by entering the promo code podcast10 today.
So when it comes to OPRE, in your time there, would you say that it substantively changed at all? And I would define that in two ways. I mean, I don't know what the budget was when you got there. It was about 150 million or so that went out in contracts and stuff more recently. But just in size like that, or in the scope of what you did, would you say that
Yes.
this entity has evolved or changed over time?
Yes. So first off, I should say I inherited I think in accounting, we call it an ongoing entity. I inherited an office with a strong history and reputation that had done a lot of very good work, particularly in the area of welfare to work programs, which is where most of its funding lay. I believe when I first became director of the office, the budget was about 30 million. So it did grow substantially in funding, largely because Congress, in establishing new programs or reauthorizing old programs, more and more frequently would set aside funds for research and evaluation. And that reflects the sort of broader trend in attention to and support for the federal role in research and evaluation. So some of the new areas that we took on over the time that I was there included research on pregnancy prevention, research on home visiting, research on healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood programs, research on human trafficking programs. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. And then other areas that grew in size and scope included childcare research, welfare research, Head Start research.
And a lot of child welfare research.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I did also want to say that, this trend in growth at OPRE was, I think, really in tune with a broader government-wide trend. Many agencies, cabinet agencies that had not had a robust evaluation function developed one over the time that I was in government. And then I also believe that the expertise and professionalism of the evaluation staff grew over the time that I was there. And I've said on the record, I think the OPRE staff are a national treasure. Just expertise on methods, expertise on substance, commitment to mission, wonderful to work with.
That sort of brings us to what's happened of late here. So Naomi's been out of OPRE for a couple of years now, but just last month we're running this in March. So this what I'm describing here happened in February. The Administration for Children and Families and its leader, Alex Adams, announced first kind of through an internal memo, and it really started to get out there quickly after that. OPRE would be downsized as a centralized entity, and a lot of the work that it was doing at this moment would be moved into the different program offices at ACF. And I'm just going to quote from his memo explaining his position on why. What he said was, situating research staff within program offices ensures that study designs benefit from deep programmatic expertise and operational realities and eliminates barriers to evidence utilization. So this prompted quite a strong response from people in the research and evaluation community. The Data Foundation has started to circulate a sign-on letter, sort of appealing above Alex Adams to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Going to quickly quote from this, and then we'll go back to Naomi. But what that letter said, and she did sign on to it. I noticed she's one of the many people that have. Under this restructuring, we expect only mandated research will continue, and even that work will now require direct approval from political appointees, compromising the scientific independence that gives evaluation findings their credibility and utility. This means years of ongoing studies, taxpayer-funded data collection efforts, and research partnerships will likely be abandoned in many cases just as they were poised to deliver findings. So that is a pretty dramatic prediction of what is to come. Naomi, I welcome any thoughts from you on what the Data Foundation posits there and what specifically makes you think that Mr. Adams' logic about situating research workers with program offices is a mistake.
Sure. I did sign the letter. Apparently, 140 organizations and more than 650 individuals signed the letter, which is very gratifying. I think this work is really important. And so it's uplifting to see that a lot of other people do too. So, ACF's evaluation policy has 5 principles: rigor, relevance, transparency, independence, and ethics. And guidance from many other agencies, including cabinet agencies, Department of Labor, HUD, I believe, have adopted evaluation policies with identical or very similar principles. And indeed, OMB's guidance on implementation of the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act includes very similar principles. OMB's guidance was issued in the first Trump administration, and Russell Vought was the author, signature on several memos providing guidance. So to quote Russell Vought from 2021, federal agencies should enable evaluators to operate with an appropriate level of independence from programmatic, regulatory, policymaking, and stakeholder activities. While stakeholders have an important role in identifying evaluation priorities, the implementation of evaluation activities should be appropriately insulated from political and other undue influences that may affect their objectivity, impartiality, and professional judgment. I agree with that statement. And I think a key element is that the decision making about evaluation should be the evaluation function should be housed at a fairly high level in the hierarchy. And indeed, there was a report about the Department of Labor following some instances where research reports were suppressed and were not released. And one of the key recommendations of that GAO study was that the evaluation function should report directly to the Assistant Secretary. I could also quote for you. So this is a statement from Wade Horn, who was Assistant Secretary at ACF in the
Bush administration.
George W. Bush administration. He was extremely supportive of research and evaluation and genuinely interested in, rigorous, sound results to inform policymaking. And he is quoted in a book actually written by my predecessor as director of OPRE. In talking about the role of the civil service, he said, what's required is someone who's committed to evaluation and research and who's high enough on the food chain to forcefully make the case to changes in political leadership. So I've quoted Russell Vought, I've quoted Wade Horn, and I will say myself that I think by moving research staff into the programs, those staff will be relatively low in the hierarchy and will lack standing to defend the independence of research and evaluation studies.
And so without picking on any particular program staff, because that's not the point, I think if I could just help myself and others listening to this kind of bring this to life, like the hypothetical concern here is there's some research that's coming back to you guys in the federal government, and it's not...
Oh, you mean a product, a report?
Yeah. And it's not going to say what somebody in a program office would want it to say.
Mm-hmm.
The concern is that if you have this central entity like OPRE, that product is coming back to it, and somebody of stature on your level or whoever is running OPRE right now, I know her name, Lauren Suppley, right?
Yep. Yes, and she is wonderful, extremely skilled, extremely committed to the mission, and extremely collaborative with program offices.
Yeah. So it's somebody on that level, and nothing is perfect. One of those people could back down or be politicized, right? But it's more likely that product is going to get a fair shake and presentation to the leadership than if a program officer concerned with politics is in the middle of it. Is that fair to say? I mean,
yes, it is fair to say. So, over my time at OPRE, I was engaged in countless discussions with program and policy staff about draft research reports. And sometimes the program staff have essential insights. They are the people most familiar with programs. So their review was valuable, and we always provided our program partners an opportunity to review reports. They didn't get to change the findings. I often found that the adjectives were the problem. So, the report might
As they
say this
often
is,
are in journalism as well.
yes,
Yes.
adjectives, really,
Yes.
we should abolish them. So, the report might come in and the program office might say, well, this sentence, I don't know, somehow implies that we've never done this before. Or, this sentence says that, I don't know, that this finding is astonishing and we don't think it's astonishing. I would say 100% of the time, maybe 99, we were able to reach agreement, often by eliminating the adjectives and simply presenting the facts. So, those conversations are really important conversations. And it's important that both sides in the conversation have stature. And I do worry that if the research and evaluation is not reporting to a senior civil servant, the research and evaluation side of that conversation will be disadvantaged or overpowered.
I was hoping you could kind of explain what the Data Foundation's concern is when they reference this mandated research as the only thing that will continue. What is that breakdown of things that are mandated and things that I guess are elective? What's the other?
Sure. So I can't give you the numbers, but I can give you some categories. So
Sure.
sometimes a statute will say the administration will conduct a study to address the following questions and will spend the following amount of money on that particular study. The National Head Start Impact Study is an example where that happened. Sometimes the statute will say X percent, often a small number like a 0.5%, X percent of funds for this program shall be spent on research and evaluation. Sometimes the statute will say up to X percent or up to this number of dollars may be spent on research and evaluation. So the latter would certainly be an example of research and evaluation that is not mandated.
Mm-hmm. Any specific, because I mean, we're 3 years out from you being there? A little more?
I left in March of 2022.
Well,
so that's almost 4 years.
Given that I'm sure you're still plugged in and that some of these things tend to take a long time, are there any specific research or evaluation you're aware of that you fear might be canceled, or regular areas of research and eval that you think might get cut off here?
I'm not that plugged in.
Not that plugged in. Okay. I'll get you out of here on a question you'll probably hate, but I think is very fair given how long you were there and how long you led it. If this happened while you were there, would you resign?
That is a really good question. I don't know. I will say that I talked about the ACF evaluation policy endlessly. I also, at my own expense, got the 5 principles printed on tote bags and water bottles and chapstick and ball caps. I tried as hard as I could to get those principles infused into the very foundational matter of ACF. And I used to say that, well, a couple of things. One is when I talked about the evaluation policies, 5 principles with federal staff, people always perked up at the discussion of independence. And in that role, I had in the back of my mind pretty constantly, what can I do to protect this entity and this function? And I used to say, I want to be sure that if some new young Hill staffer says, well, what's this money for? This looks pointless. Let's get rid of it. I wanted some slightly more experienced Hill staffer to say, oh, no, that's OPRE. They do really good work. So this letter from the Data Foundation is kind of a version of that. And I think many other evaluation staff had in the back of their minds that fear that research could be suppressed or canceled or altered. And that's why there was always such lively discussion of the principle of independence. And I used to joke that, the evaluation policy was just a policy. It could be changed, but at least I'd have something to wave in the air on my way out the door if I chose to resign. I haven't seen the memo. I don't know how it'll be implemented. I don't know what OPRE's role will be. So I doubt that I would have sort of walked out the door at a moment like this moment, but depending on how things rolled out, maybe.
Naomi Goldstein, former head of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and a nurse in Washington, D.C. So if you ever find yourself in a hospital, she might be taking care of you. Naomi Goldstein, thanks so much for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, John. It's a privilege.
Thanks to Naomi Goldstein, former head of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at the Administration for Children and Families, for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the SafeCamp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCamp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elliott. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always get us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.